Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all for inviting me to be here today. I hope that today we can get a lot of stuff done. I know in settings like this, when it's a smaller group, sometimes there's more discussions, which kind of triggers a longer day, but we're gonna try to move at a good pace. Just real quick, my name is Juan Cruz, been practicing law for 27 years. Started out in San Antonio, down to the Valley, back to San Antonio, finally ended up in Laredo. Had the privilege of working with Terry for about 20 years at UISD. So my firm is a government entity defense-based law firm. So we represent about 20 school districts across the states, counties, cities, and do really a lot. And my nephew tells me, who's a sophomore at Columbia right now, he's like, every time I'm doing something or traveling, I call him to check up on him. Like, what are you doing? Well, I'm coming out of a board meeting. It's like, you need to write a book about your life at board meetings, because that's exactly kind of a lot of what I do on a nightly basis. I usually have two parts to my day, which is basically the office day and then traveling somewhere for a board meeting. So a lot of what we are doing today is very familiar territory to me because, Robert's Rules of Orders, operating procedures, closed session, open meetings, all that stuff that we're going to cover. I'm glad that you are trying to really do a good job of adhering to Open Meetings Act and all of these other things. We're going to talk about some of those issues today. What we will start off with is obviously kind of your mission, because I think that that's the most important thing, that if you haven't looked at it, this is the time to look at it in a setting like this. I'm not going to work with your mission statement. That's not my role. That's your role. You read your mission statement here today, and it's a very simple statement. And it's basically, is that something that you want to stick with? Because if you think, well, we're missing a word or we're missing something, this is the time to say, let's update it. And then maybe you put it as an agenda item for your board meeting in the future. So real simply, you're a nonprofit board. And I want to talk about that just a little bit. Remember, you are a nonprofit. You're not a political subdivision of the state. You're not a local or federal government. You do not receive most of your funds from local governments. So with that respect, there's a lot of privacy that you are afforded in the state of Texas. When you deal with a public entities such as I do, you are very much open to the public. It has to be transparent. It's what Governor Abbott always says, government in the sunshine. This is not that. You are a nonprofit, and for that, a lot of what you do can remain private, and that's a luxury. I have sat in on almost every board, it seems like, here in Laredo. To be perfectly honest, I have resigned from mostly all boards. I just I help out the Advocacy Center, I help out Ruth B. Cal, just kind of on their legal end, just a little bit of what I can, but I've sat in your shoes, and I just want you to know that, like, what you do, you're a nonprofit corporation, which means that you're not under the ire of the public, okay? Just because you get public funds does not make you a public entity. There's case law about that, and we've shared that with your executive director, that specifically says, what is the test for you to become governed by the state of Texas? And that's basically when you are receiving funds that you need those funds in order to operate your nonprofit. You're not there. Thankfully, you all have a lot of very good fundraising, private money that comes in, and what you're getting from the government, is really a fraction of your overall budget. So, and anyway, you are a nonprofit. Your mission is to promote agricultural, horticultural, home economics, and vocational industrial trades. Is there anything missing from that sentence that you think right now that, we need to add because we've been expanding in this area? I'm not sure when was the last time you all visited this statement. If not, then we can, you're providing a learning experience for individuals through hands-on engagement in agricultural, horticultural, family and consumer sciences, artistic, commercial, and industrial pursuits by sponsoring, holding, and conducting exhibitions, fairs, livestock shows, and rodeos, which educate and I love this sentence, which educate and inspire youth to focus on these career fields. So Is that really a reflection of what you're doing, or do you think you need to add more, or you want to stick with this because it kind of sets the tone of everything that you're doing? Is that pretty much good for you? Yeah? Okay. Well, then we'll stick with that. All right, let's go over real quickly bylaws basics. Bylaws are, I've seen a lot of bylaws along the way. Some entities send me their bylaws for review. I worked everything from United Day to Salvation Army, a whole bunch of nonprofits in town. I do want to commend you because your bylaws are pretty good. Pretty good. And what is the bylaws really kind of should encompass at least this. That's kind of like your Bible, right? And as Terry knows me, I don't really read slides. Maybe a little bit, but I'm not going to be reading slides to you. I think that that's very boring. But just kind of highlight different things for you. Basically, your bylaws are there. What is any bylaws, whether you're dealing with this or organization or any other organization, that is your Bible. That's what you're going to kind of have. That doesn't mean that you're going to have everything and anything in those bylaws. It's just kind of a overall, like how we are going to organize our nonprofit, right? Why should an organization have bylaws? Unfortunately, I've been here where you have difficult board members and you want to sometimes I've been in nonprofits where we have had to kick out board members because they want to go back to the same agenda item over and over again. In any case, the bylaws basically tells you how you're going to keep things running smoothly, right? And when things get tough, what we're going to do about it. And in addition to that, it also should have what are our attendance requirements, whether we're going to conduct business and how we're going to conduct business as well. And I don't want to pick on anybody, but I do think that right now and I'm going to go to what's happening in the news right now with the UISD board and the issue of having a contract approved by 4 board members and so on and so forth, because that's a perfect opportunity to learn from and to see if you want to revise the structure, because what happened at UISD with 2 people voting for a contract that is, now has resulted over 300,000 can very well happen with this board as well, the way you are structured in your bylaws. And if you want to avoid that, we can do that by going through what you have today. So the bylaws provisions, they should have pretty much all of this, and, again, kudos to you. You really have a lot of what in there as well. In addition to the bylaws, some good, fine organizations also have what they call board operating procedures. You did not have that. We have invented that for you. And this is what I have for a lot of my clients. Cynthia, Albert, in terms of what you can borrow that when you go back to your entities, and Terry as well. But we're going to study that, in the second hour of today. So the use of the bylaws is, one of the things that I recommend, folks, we do not have a brain that has everything and anything about the bylaws in our head. Bring a copy of those bylaws to every meeting. Okay, so because you should not have the expectation that your executive director or any one of you is going to know those bylaws, left and right. It's impossible, okay? And if you have a situation that conflicts with the bylaws, then guess what? Deal with that situation first and then rectify or reconcile how you're going to deal with the bylaws, okay? So don't be caught up too much on doing something that is in transgression of the bylaws if what you are doing is in the best interest of your organization, okay? Amending the bylaws, you can definitely do it, and that should be done to reflect the direction of where you're going as an organization. Good organizations review bylaws at least once a year. You don't have to be reviewing it every month, but if you need to tweak them, go ahead and so you know what, we're doing this that I really don't think it doesn't have how we deal with vendors, how we deal with conflicts of interest. It's not really that clear. We'll clear it up. And there's some stuff here that is still, an issue that we're going to be discussing in the bylaws today, but you don't have too many issues. What is the procedure about amending the bylaws before we get into them? It's very simple. The bylaws may be amended, repealed, or added to, or renewed, or new bylaws may be adopted by a 2/3 vote of the membership present at any regular meeting or any special call meeting. At least 10 written days notice has to be given, and a copy of the bylaw should be distributed to each member 5 days prior. Okay? So you do have a special provision about amending bylaws. It's not just by majority vote. You have 15 more members. That doesn't mean like 8 of you come and you can amend bylaws. You need 2/3, and people need to know about those bylaw changes 5 days in advance. What happens if you did not do it in accordance with the bylaws? Then it's simple. You go back and you revisit that vote, or you go back and you revisit those bylaws. Okay? So just to conclude this little section that I have, again, bylaws are there to avoid any confusion, to know that there is going to be consistency for everyone, and to make sure that as you have these bylaws, they're a breathing document. They're documents that you should be not too shy about amending if you think that they need to be amended. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
If a bylaw change is brought and voted down, can it be brought back again at another time?
We're gonna get into the Robert's Rules of Order, but yes, it can be brought back up, and I guess I'll just go down to this because I get that question a lot, and a lot of board members that I deal with kind of get frustrated. Let's say, for example, you all decide to purchase 3 tables, and it's on the agenda at the meeting. Raul makes a motion. It's seconded by Terry, and it fails. Well, other agenda items go by, and then Raul says, I want to go back to the vote on the tables. I like to, have it reconsidered. Under the Robert's Rules of Order, Raul or Terry cannot make that motion. Why? Because they were on the losing side of that motion. The only one that can bring back a vote at the same meeting is somebody on the winning side of that motion. Okay? But that's different than you take a vote on the tables, you all adjourn, you all come back, probably meet with the executive director and say, you know what, we did have money for the tables. Raul says, I'd like to bring it back, to be reconsidered at the meeting. That can actually happen. Now, it may be frustrating for board members, and that's where the bylaws, the board operating procedures kick in. That's when you say, you know what, we're not going to allow that to be on the agenda every month because we're not going to go back to that table issue. You're going to say, once it's done, it cannot be revoted again, 5 times. It can only be voted again one other time. Yes.
Can a board member that wasn't present at the meeting bring it back?
Yes. Yes. Unless you state otherwise in your operating procedures or your bylaws, which is why you're here today. Okay? Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question was more on the bylaw changes. Like if we present to change a bylaw and it doesn't pass, can we bring that back at a future time?
Yes, you can. Yeah. But whether or not you're going to be allowed to be bringing that bylaw, let's say I want to bring it back in October, November, December, then at that point it becomes frustrating to the other board members. Like, why are we doing that over and over again? That's where you have to put structure in either your bylaws or your board operating procedures to say, once it fails, it can only be brought back X times. Okay?
I have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
If a board member was part of a meeting and then they halfway through the meeting they have to leave, they leave. Can that board member bring up that something that passed back?
Yes.
They can.
Unless, again, you address it in your bylaws about, absent board members are not going to have the authority to bring back an item that, they missed. You can absolutely have that addressed either in your bylaws or your operating procedures. Yeah. I would find it very frustrating, and that's where, you need to have removal authorities of board members that if they're doing stuff like that, like, are they really working on behalf of the organization, or is it time for them to go find another nonprofit to devote their time to? Okay. So overview of the bylaws. This is something that I think that is your own. You do have this new provision that says a member who's not in good standing is somebody that fails to complete their volunteer hours and or fundraisers are not eligible for voting. So that's effective May 1st. So these are your members. This is what you want them to have, which is 5 hours. I thought that was pretty low. That's a very good threshold. That invites a lot of people to be able to be part of it. Obviously, if you think, you know what, it should be 7 hours or it should be 10 hours, then this is the time to say, let's increase it. And that's something that can be noted down and be brought back in the future. But if you're okay with this in terms of their participation and their 1-year membership, then you leave it as is. Okay, so no problem here.
The only reason,
Yeah.
Juan, just so you know, the reason we have the 5 hours is because we do have a little bit of trouble for that volunteerism.
Yeah.
The ones that are already members and they're volunteering, of course, they do, 40 plus hours. But we're trying to recruit volunteers, and that's the difficult part. So I think 5 is still good for us.
I'm good. I know I've sat on nonprofits here in San Antonio, and I was one. I was at a function in San Antonio on Thursday for a nonprofit. We represent Sunshine Cottage for the Deaf. Wonderful organization based there in Alamo Heights. Talking to the executive director, Albert, there, part of his job description is he has to fundraise $4 million a year.
Wow.
I know. And I'm like, what? He goes,
How much how much your salary is? $1 million?
no, he's pretty high up there. But part of the thing though with him is that he already has the Alamo Heights crowd that gives him big. Like at that fundraiser, which is the sold out event on Thursday night, it was probably I'm sure $1 million was brought in just on one night alone. Wow. So that's crazy that you have that, but that's kind of 5 hours to me. It's good, and it holds people accountable. Like you can't just be here and put it on your resume to be part of the be introduced later as a L.I.F.E member. You got to actually do something. So L.I.F members and board of directors position. In order for you to graduate to be, in the board of directors, then you have to be at least here for 1 year, right? And have, a minimum of 10 hours per membership year, and obviously participate in your fundraisers. So that's good enough, or do you want to increase this amount of time and effort? That's pretty. I thought it was pretty decent. 10 hours is good enough. I'm sure you all do more than that. So as the board, you have 15 members. You have to be in good standing. Pretty simple. Is there anything about? Do you have problems with quorums, or are you pretty good at that? Because that's where we've run into issues where I've sat on boards that we've modified this membership to make sure that because people don't show up and stuff.
We usually don't have any issues having quorum.
Good. So your 10 years is basically you have 7 in 2022 and 8 in 2024. Elected for 4-year terms. So good for you. Okay. And then your election is held in May, right? You get your nominations must be received by email on the designated time and place. And you have to receive a majority of the affirmative votes from the total number of members eligible to vote attending the meeting in which there is a quorum. So let's break that down a little bit, right? So, what is a quorum? It's pretty simple, right? Because you have 15, it's going to be your 8. So 8 people show up, right? And you're going to have, somebody nominated. That is going to be good enough to have a quorum. What happens if, 3 people decide to abstain? from the vote, and 3 people vote for a certain person and 2 people against it, then that's gonna pass. So you can technically get, on this board with, in this case, the way you have your bylaws written with 3 votes, which again goes back to what I just told you earlier. So this is the time to say, no, we really think that we need like the majority. In order for you to be on this board, you need the majority of the. It's going to be 8, right?
Well, so basically what the vote is actually of the membership. It's not of the board of directors.
Oh, okay.
It's of the membership. So right now, this year, we have 63 members.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a majority, it's, I guess, a two-pronged test. It's what constitutes a quorum at a membership meeting for election, and then it's a majority of the quorum present.
Okay.
And then for officer elections, it's the scenario you just mentioned.
Yeah.
That only the board votes for officers.
Okay. Well, I mean, and that's something that if you want to keep it like that, be careful with, the quorum issue is what I find troubling because people think, well, we should really be, especially for significant things, maybe purchases over a certain amount of money, there should be quorum of the 15 members, not just those that are present. Okay, and we're going to go over some of those examples right now. So you do have an attendance requirement. This is it pretty much, folks. If you have a director that has 3 consecutive unexcused absences, they pretty much resign. Or if you have a director that has been 4 unexcused absence in a calendar year, then they're going to be resigned as well. I think that's pretty good. It kind of holds people to be here if you're really interested in the organization. And how do you maybe get excused? You make sure that you email somebody to say, hey, within 24 hours that you're not going to be able to make the meeting. And we're going to talk about excused absences and unexcused absences, but not in the bylaws. It's going to be more in the board operating procedures. I have some ideas on that. Okay. So how do you get removed? Removal of the director requires 2/3 vote of the directors at the meeting. So that's a little higher threshold, right? And it's the resignation. You can resign really at any time, and it's really effective when it is tendered in, and that creates, of course, your vacancy on the board. So the board meetings are basically what you have here. Not sure if you're going to change any of this, but it's the second Tuesday, 6 p.m. You have your annual meetings as well and your special meetings. I do want to talk about this provision about special meetings because it's been an issue at other organizations. It says that 7 board members may call a special call meeting. But it does, and you obviously you send your written notification, your request to the board chair. I have had issues, and this is very common, where the board chair looks at this request and says,
For some reason, I thought we had a 5-day provision. But
not
I
there.
guess.
No, the way it's been, we've never had 7 board members request a special meeting. It's always come from the board president.
Yeah.
But I think the way it was understood, the unwritten understanding of this was the 7 would say, we want to meet on Wednesday of next week. That gives you the 3-day notice.
Yeah.
Right, but it's not written, so it's like you're saying, it leaves that gray area,
Yeah.
right, for the president to say, well, you're making the request, I call the meeting, we'll call it, next year.
Whenever I want.
Does the notice come from the 7 board members or from the, is it a
It
request?
says by written petition of 7 board of directors to the board president and board secretary. So again, you may never have a problem, but I always say address problems before they arise. Especially some things, let's say, and of course this is not your current board president, but if you have a board president that is really overstepping and really causing problems for you, and you say, you know what, we need to remove this board president now, you tender your request and nothing happens. Because, that person controls when the agenda's gonna be posted, right? So, I've run into a lot of those issues in the past. Just think about it. It's always best to address something when you don't have.
We've never had a board president hold back on it, but that doesn't mean it'll never happen.
Exactly.
Right,
So, I mean, the idea would is to put a clock.
I said 15 days is an average time. 15
I mean, I
days
think
is
most
15
special
days.
meetings are gonna be called because it's something that's very important and urgent.
Pressing, something pressing.
So, I would say 10 days, 15 days at the most.
What if the notice is directly from the 7 board members? So let's have notice, and if it's signed by 7 board members,
You have to
That's
post
what
it
we're
immediately.
so it'll say 3 days, whenever that may be you bypass the president.
Just keep in mind that whatever change you all are talking about during this workshop has to be presented to the membership. We have to call a special meeting, we have to provide the notice. It's not gonna happen today or immediately.
No, but these are just discussions so that we can prepare, and when we're ready to amend the bylaws, we have all these items
Something for us
together
to
at
consider
one
for
meeting.
next year's
So we're
membership.
doing it when it's being presented and
Yeah.
it's
So,
fresh.
yes.
We're not
So
trying to
Terry, if
make
you wanna
it-
note it down, maybe put 15 days, and we'll go back to that. Then
I
whenever
think
you have
that-
time in the future.
If it's a pressing issue, I think we need to reduce the timeline.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, when we're gonna vote on something, is because we're gonna spend money.
Mhm.
And we need something done.
Or if the president, what you can
5
also
days.
do is, if it's a pressing issue for the 7, then you put in the bylaws that those 7 people request when they want the meeting.
That's what I was
Right,
getting
leave
at.
it up to the people that have the
Because
urgency.
If 7 people have an urgency to meet in 4 days,
As long as you meet the 3-day rule of
That's- I mean,
notice,
that's-
then you
yeah.
put the burden on the 7 that want to override the president.
That's a
Which is what
large-
we do at the city. You
a
know, the
group is
burden's on-
large enough to have the meeting.
Yeah, that's, well, it's not the majority of the board.
But it's large enough to,
Right.
hey,
All you need is one more.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, that's an issue you don't have, but, and I would say bylaws, operating procedures should be probably for not just this organization, and not this particular members, but futures that come after you. So this is new about mandatory training, and that's why we put it in red for you. You must complete an annual in-person training. Director is not available, then they have 5 business days to complete the training. The director's appointed, then the newly appointed director has 5 business days. Failure to comply will be automatic removal. So this was something that was adopted, something new. Again, I think that that's great. You gotta make sure you know what you're stepping into. And then, of course, you have the board compensation, which was really, good Chick-fil-A sandwich. And you have your executive committee, you have secretary president, past president, president-elect, I've seen second vice presidents, I've seen third vice presidents, so it's up to you all, but that's good enough, it's a workable group, right? Then you have your life officers, and this is exactly who you are, and, they're elected at the May board meeting. And then the term of office for 1 year, no officer shall serve more than 3 consecutive terms in the same office. So I remember when I was at the Advocacy Center, I think I was there for 10 years as the president. So but obviously, if you have a good president, you want to stick by him or her. You can always waive the bylaws if need be. And of course, you have the treasurer that's kind of in charge of the finance committee, and I'm stepping ahead a little bit, but I'll go through those provisions in just a bit. You have your removal and resignation.
I think Terry and I discussed this sometime back, was that we don't have an officer, let's say the treasurer, that's very
Right.
important, just drop and say, I'm out tomorrow. right? And there's no way of us going back and saying, hey, Joe, we need this, we need that, because Joe will probably just disconnect himself from the organization. Right, so you're gonna resign, you have to tell us within 45 days so we can prepare and, have a turnover, right?
Transition.
A transition more than anything of the position, where if the president resigns, we're not just walking away, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna leave in 45 days. So
Okay.
we can have that transitional period, maybe it should be 30, maybe it should be 15,
What do you think, Juan?
but,
Well, I mean, I think that maybe you should qualify it as absent extenuating circumstances. Everybody has, honestly, when I resigned from, one day I just came in and just resigned from every single board house in this town, just because of time, and I just did it effective immediately. It was just, I had also a lot of other things with, my dad and this and that, so I think you should have a clause absent extenuating circumstances at least, because things may pop up in your life that say, I can't give you any more time, I have pressing needs to attend.
And then there's nothing that holds them to
Right.
stay there either, so.
Right. But no
You
one
can't
wants to,
force somebody to do something.
no one wants to leave, I guess, in bad
Terms.
form,
Civilly you can, but I mean.
The concern with this is that you can't elect a new treasurer for 45 days.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
So
it kind of,
you'll be in
A little
limbo.
bit of a
You can't
gap.
hold them, but you can't choose another one.
Well, what if the executive committee or the president approves it and they're released earlier than that, so you can do that? You can elect.
that's a good clause to put in there. Yeah. Mhm.
Because it can be accepted earlier than the 45 days, but if you really need them to be there, then you can hold them to it.
Right. So moving forward, the duties of the president basically runs the show, and ex officio of all your committees, except the nominating committee, of course. And it's gonna be there to sign contracts, other instruments, so on and so forth. The duties of the president, yes?
the nominating committee no longer exists, so we need to correct that.
Oh, okay. So that's something that we need to go back to, about the board president.
Before, they used to have a committee that would interview potential board members and all that. That doesn't happen anymore.
Mhm.
So we need to correct that.
Okay.
Am I correct, sir?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay, well, we'll go back to that. The president-elect, basically, when the president's not there, then, he or she steps in, and make sure, I like the fact that you do have that president-elect, like you're receiving committee reports, because you're gonna be the next one in line, so you should be, supposed to be up to speed on everything going on. The duties of the past president is basically to kind of be your goodwill ambassador in your community, and if the president can't do it, the president-elect can't do it, then the past president steps in. Duties of the secretary, pretty much a lot. And I've been there. You got, a lot of the record keeping to do at, your meetings and stuff. One of the most important things I think is your attendance, to keep track of those attendance, and if people are missing, to just call it out so that, people understand like this person needs to be removed or send a letter or something to that effect. And the treasurer is also super important. Make sure that the finances are on top. And I don't want to scare you off this board, but I did represent a nonprofit once where Albert, and actually what ended up happening with that nonprofit is they're no longer, they went under. They owed a whole bunch of taxes to the federal government. And the way the law is, the tax situation, then the executive director was personally responsible for it. And he had to basically, I think it probably took him like close to 5-6 years, and it was like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I don't sign the tax return, do I? Am I still liable?
The
I think
person that signs the tax return
Yes.
is liable for
Yes,
tax.
you are. That's why it's very important. That money, you need to keep on top of it, because the IRS is gonna come looking for the director and the board members. I mean, I always have been in nonprofits, but I'm always the one that is always like, okay, finance is important, and if I see that there's problem, then I don't really am going to continue, or what's the wrap-up plan for this organization. because I personally have been involved in helping out a nonprofit in that situation where we kind of had to wrap it up because they just, were operating, obviously, expenses way too high, and the income did not come in. So it's important that you have these budget reports and review them. And I'm not saying, a lot of what also frustrates me sometimes about nonprofits, some that I deal with in board meetings as well, that everything that they do at a finance meeting, committee meeting, or a personnel committee meeting is end up again at the regular meeting. That's really duplicitous of your time, and it's almost an insult to the people in the finance committee that you don't really trust what they're doing. Should be like, moving on and be more efficient.
This organization pays federal taxes?
Well, no, see now, I wanted to explain. We were involved in a bingo, and at that one time, that was the only one that would pay federal taxes. That bingo, because of COVID, basically closed down.
Okay.
So that does not exist anymore, up to last year. Okay?
Personal payroll taxes.
That's the only thing, but that's on a EFTPS gets drafted every time we pay payroll.
But we do follow on 990, so
Yes.
we are subject to any penalties, right?
That's
where
the situation,
probably-
Kevin,
okay.
with personnel.
So the 990 is the non-for-profit, and then there's a 990T, which is the one for the bingo money. So there's two different returns that need to be filed because there's two different sources of income. One that's taxable and one that's non-taxable. But everything else gets, paid through EFTPS. And by the way, I used to be the treasurer.
Okay.
And so.
Yeah, Cynthia.
Juan, just a quick thing, do you recommend that, we have different committees, we have bookers of committees, and they all meet, individually, and they discuss it, and especially when the fair is coming up and all. And then we get the reports at the board meeting, and sometimes, like you say, they go into the details, of everything. And so to me, like you say, you trusted those committees and those committee chairs with the information. To me, there should just be a very brief report that the committee met yesterday, last week, or whatever, and this is our recommendation to this board to do A, B, C, D.
Executive summary, bullet points,
Exactly.
one
That's
pager.
what I feel should be.
Yeah.
And then, because if you wanna know more, well, as a board member, as a member, well, then go to the committee meeting.
Yeah.
If you wanna say, well, I really wanna know what they discussed, because they're just giving me a summary. I think to me, that makes the board meetings run more fluidly and, more, smooth and stuff, and everybody has a meeting. You have questions after the board meeting, they'll say, like Sabina, okay, well, what else was discussed? I mean, what did y'all talk to this or whatever? If you have questions, go to the committee meetings, in my opinion.
Send that information to the board members, all of the backup. You read it at home. You have questions, then you can talk to the executive director or talk to the chairperson of that committee. No need to go into all of the intricacies of that. It becomes
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have, people they turn in reports and we want to base ourselves off of what they've turned in because they did their due diligence, they did the work for it, and I guess it's verbal. Sometimes we get, I guess nitpicky on what's on the agenda, and I guess you would suggest that, is there anything we can make on the changes on the bylaws, or is it just a operating procedure?
So when I came in to represent United, they were having meetings that would go to 2 in the morning. And I was like, what? So I got here and I'm like, okay, I studied it, and then I met with Dr. Barber at the time. I said, okay, what's going on is that you have a business committee, you have an instructional committee, and then all of these agenda items end up again at the regular meeting. So either you put a consent agenda and have it a true consent and wipe away everything that you did in the business instructional, you put it on consent, and one motion, that's it. The first meeting that we had after that, we got out at 8 p.m. and people started clapping, administrators started clapping because they were like, wow, this has never happened. That's really what, the way to short circuit is have consent agenda items. Remember that the Robert Rules of Order, and I didn't put this in there, but consent agenda items, it could be A through F, and you can pass them I move to accept the consent agenda item A through F as presented. Second, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, motion carries. That's it. But if Terry says, well, there's item D that I do want to take out of consent, that can still happen, you know? If there's a purchase of $500,000, they're like, oh, it's in consent. I know it's reviewed at finance committee, but just this one, I want to, but you don't have everything again. So I strongly suggest adding a consent agenda items for things that are just routine, things that really do not, maybe already went through other people's eyes, so to become more efficient in your time.
Juan, I have a question. In your opinion, how long should a nonprofit board meeting take?
Really, honestly, for me, it's 1 hour.
Our meetings are sometimes 4 hours.
Yeah, no. I
So
mean,
10 at night, sometimes 9 at night, and we start at 6.
I would, I would have dropped out. Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes we're pushing it 1.5 hours, but it's not. Yeah, it's too long.
And then my next question was, although it doesn't take long, and this is not part of the bylaws, it's not part of the operating procedures manual, I'm sure that you're gonna recommend, but we have customary, kind of what I went through on the agenda with you, where we have the president's report, the treasurer's report, and the executive director's monthly report. We usually don't take long there, but you know, if there's a finance question, it comes up. Or if there's a question based on what the report I gave will take longer. Do you suggest that maybe as part of the, what we call the backup package of the agenda, that maybe the president has something to report, we include it there?
Yeah.
And the board members read that along with the minutes at home. And if they have a question, they bring it up. If not, it moves forward, as well as the treasurers. We only present balances of accounts. If they have anything new to present to the board, informational,
Yeah.
then that's the only thing I do with my report. Or do you think it is, I guess, fruitful for it to actually be an item on the agenda?
Well, you know what we do at Edgewood is that we go through the agenda. You know, in San Antonio, it's one of our clients, and they have all of the communication, all the reports from HR, finance, superintendent, so on and so forth. They don't even acknowledge it. They pretty just say, you know, they go through the agenda and say, there are reports there for your information. Do I have a motion to adjourn? The only way you will go into any of those reports, because those things have already been emailed to the board members, if a board member raises a question about a particular item that he or she was sent. But I could tell you, Albert, in the last probably like couple of years, we don't even, no board member touches the, if they do, they call the superintendent. So
They
have
will
it
call me
there.
if they have a question on finance.
Have it there. Send it to them in advance. But you could just kind of say, there's the reports that have been provided to you. Any board member have any questions on it? Not, motion to adjourn. You know,
That may be something we want to change also to expedite the meeting. And then my final, I guess, observation is, I've never been part of an organization that actually had checks and balances for committees. And I feel that the provision of the bylaws that talks about the president-elect being the person committee chairs report to, I think provides that balance where you trust the committees because you know that there's an officer that has direct oversight over the committees, right? So if you don't see the president-elect bringing up a question, then the board should trust not only the committee, but the president-elect. The issue we have in my analysis of the organization is that committees do not submit the reports, or committee chairs don't submit the reports. The bylaws, and I think we've had this conversation, where the bylaws say you must submit, if you're a committee chair, your reports to the president-elect. That doesn't happen. So obviously we have that break in communication. And when I say it doesn't happen, I don't mean by everybody, because obviously there's some chairs that do, but there's some chairs that don't, right? So I think that if we emphasize that that has to be followed, there's not the president who has the sole authority of appointing committee chairs and has to step in and say, hey, committee chair X, you're not reporting to the president-elect. You put on notice. If not, you're going to be removed, right? As a committee chair,
Right.
I think would be the suggestion on how to enforce the actual reports getting to the president-elect.
So a new thing also that I've seen, and I was talking to Gene about that video stuff, some organizations that of course, a lot of the entities I represent have board members also that do not get paid. So the last thing that a committee chairperson that doesn't get paid is want to go and be typing out reports and stuff like that. So, with iPhones, people now have submitted their reports, just audio record it themselves, send it in, and that's the report that the board member gets. And it's very easy to get that through your computers and stuff like that. And it'll only be reduced to writing if necessary, but it's kept as like a written report. So that's a little short circuit. As a committee member, and I've been a committee member at state levels, and I don't want to be doing written reports because I already am doing so many other things. So if it helps out, maybe say, yeah, submit a report, but it could be done orally and just email it over to the staff. Staff pumps it out to the board members. That'll be maybe an easier thing to do. Cynthia?
Again, just as an example to your points of what we're trying to make here a better and smooth flowing meetings, we at the college do the same thing. You're appointed to a finance committee, to the, whatever it is committee, and then that committee meets. And so we get a copy of the agenda in case we want to go.
And the backup.
Submit it. And it says here, the finance committee is going to discuss an appropriation of $100,000. We need to fix the parking lot. We need to blah, 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 blah. And so they have the meeting. So you're notified. If you want to go, fine. If you're not, but at the board meeting, the agenda items are there, but the board chair says, I want to make a motion that we approve items A through Z. And if you have a question, like you say, okay, I'd like to pull out item number C because I want further information. I was unable to attend the meeting, or what is this really about, because it's not specific. But you move the meeting, you approve 20 items from each of the committee chairs because we're trusting them, with the information. And the committees are, comprised of other members of the board, 3 or 4 other members, and then staff. But you get the agenda. You go, okay, finance is meeting on Tuesday, the other committee, the student success committee is meeting on Wednesday at 5:30. You want to go or not, but there's the agenda items. And then they're presented again, but you consent to them.
Right.
And move on to the larger things that you need to discuss.
And one of the things that you'll see in the board operating procedures as well, that after we take a break in about 5 minutes, we're going to talk about also, as a board member, when you receive information, you got to read it. And if you have questions, you ask the executive director, so that maybe that question is not really something that 14 other board members have. It's just your own, right? And it is, things that we're going to kind of put in place. So real quickly, to help us kind of move along, you have your committee members who, committees shall have 2 more members who report to the president-elect, which is what Albert was saying a little bit earlier. And, the board can create all sorts of committees, fundraising, cleaning, marketing, so on and so forth. You have your 3 main committees, which is your finance, your advisory, your election committee. I think you have no more than 3 for the finance committee. Of all the committees that I see here, I would say which is the most important to me as a board member is the finance committee, to make sure that we have the funds to continue operating, and if we need to cut, we're going to cut. So these are your committees. If you have any other standing committees besides this, then you need to let us know so that we can add it. Your executive director is the one that manages, at the end of the day, the day-to-day operations of your organization. Board members should not be involved in the minutia of, the tables, the pens, the paper, stuff like that. That's really day-to-day. As a board member, you're governed and overseeing the management of the center, and governed and overseeing are defined by the dictionary, right? It's not, and it's very different in terms of who is the manager of the organization. And at the end of the day, you want to make sure that the executive director is going to be accountable for basically your 3 things that you see here, right? Your conditions, your activities, your business. The financial matters are pretty important, and you added this as a bylaw, which is why we put it in red. Board may accept gifts on behalf of L.I.F.E, but must approve the acceptance of the gift by resolution to ensure that it's consistent with the business purpose. I've seen a lot of organizations, sometimes they get computers that are donated to them. Guess what? The computers that are donated do not mesh with the computer, and then you end up spending more money because of the donation you got. Okay, so that's why it's important for people to know, what are we getting, and is it something that we can actually use, or we're not something that we cannot actually require or use. So conflicts of interest, that is something that again, on the news unfortunately. But it basically talks about, if you have family members and stuff on the board, that's not going to be allowed because we don't want, basically mom, dad, sister, brother on the board of directors to avoid what you have here at the very last block voting, right? And what I did for you is basically something that I took out from one of my clients is sometimes if people say, well, what's third degree consanguinity? What's, well, that's better for you to see it and cousin, second cousin, and there you see, and Albert said that you can take that back to your organizations. So contracts involving board members. This is what's happening in the news, right? And you basically say, as a board member, Terry can have a contract with L.I.F.E, but she needs to abstain from voting, and basically, disclose that. So kind of the same thing that we have for governing bodies is what we have here for you today. So we are going to hit the break right now. It's 10 a.m. and we're going to take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back. All right. I'll let Raul kind of read this because this is straight out of your board of, code of ethics. You want to read it for the group?
Yes. I will faithfully abide by the articles of incorporation, bylaws, Robert's Rules of Order, and policies of L.I.F.E. I will exercise reasonable care, good faith, and due diligence in organizational affairs. I will fully disclose at the earliest opportunity any information that may result in a perceived or factual conflict of interest. I will fully disclose at the earliest opportunity information of facts that would have significance in board decision making. I will remain accountable for prudent fiscal management to association members, the board, and non-profit sector, and where applicable, to government and funding bodies.
What does that mean to you? Anything in particular that stands out?
Do everything in good faith and the best of intent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But actually, I can't spot anything that stands out.
Yeah.
Fully disclose those two words.
Yeah, that you're here as a board member sitting in the best interest of the organization. And like that, you're going to be held accountable to make sure that your decision making and the way you act, either on the board table or away from the board table, does it really, is it in good faith? Are you accountable really to the mission of the L.I.F.E? The mission that you say doesn't, you're good with that mission statement. So that's what you're here for, right? Ms. Findley, you want to go over the second one? Can you read that to the group?
Professional excellence.
Mm-hmm.
I will maintain a professional level of courtesy, respect, and objectivity in all the regular international fair and exposition activities, and respect the rights of all L.I.F.E members, students, parents, employees, and members of the community. I will strive to uphold these practices and assist other L.I.F E members of the board in upholding the highest standards of conduct. I will be accountable for interest of our students that participate in any L.I.F E activity for the interests. I will not use my position to influence or my authority over students and minors to make personal demands upon students unrelated to the purposes of L.I.F E activities. I will not use any form of electronic communication, social media, text, Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, or videotape my to the L.I.F E participants if it is not within the scope of my duties.
Overall, what did you get out of that one?
Good moral conduct.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Anybody else? It's very geared towards, what you do here is in the best interest of your, what is your main mission, your main clientele? It seems to be, the way I read it, students oriented, right? That the people, the young people in our community, that's your mission in this, in terms of what your excellence, your professional excellence is about. You want to read the next one about personal gain?
I will exercise the power invested in me by L.I.F.E for the good of all members of the Laredo International Fair and Exposition organization, rather than for my personal benefit or that of the nonprofit I represent.
So, in other words, what do you?
Don't pick the judge.
Basically, like, I won't personally benefit, and neither will my family.
Yeah.
From participating.
Exactly. And sometimes I do find people get on boards not just to serve the purpose of the organization, but more to serve themselves. And that's a big no-no. Yeah.
Their own agenda.
Exactly. Terry, the next one?
Confidential information. I will respect the confidentiality of sensitive information obtained through board service.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much it's, whatever is discussed should be confidential and should not be shared with anyone that does not have a legitimate reason to know.
Right. Especially when you talk about closed session, it's not open session, it's closed. So closed, it's very tempting to go back and share things with an uncle, aunt, spouse, or whatever. Just refrain from that, because once you tell somebody, you know the way the Laredo Cheeseman Patrol is. It goes all over the place, okay? So make sure that you adhere to this ethics in terms of confidential information should stay confidential for a reason.
How does a board put that into play? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
is there any
Yes.
consequences and things to that effect? Is basically where I'm going. Thank you.
Yeah, so today we're going to go over a confidentiality agreement that I put together. And the consequences is going to be basically the way boards govern each other is through sanctions. Like you did something in violation of our bylaws, you did something in violation of a board operating procedures, you're going to be sanctioned. And after so many sanctions, are you going to continue allowing that board member serve on the board? Okay, that's
Basically, a written report that goes in their file.
pretty much. Yes. You want to take the next one?
Collaboration and cooperation. With respect of the diversity of the opinions of, as an expressed or acting upon the L.I.F.E board, committees, and membership. I will promote and cooperate, and partner up among with all associate members.
Yeah. So what does that kind of mean to you?
That, I mean, we're going to collaborate, let's say, with Falcon Bank and have a good partnership with them to try to move our organization to a better place.
Yeah. And that's also important that I always tell people democracy is noisy. So realize that, folks, because you know that's the first thing, diversity of opinions. Your opinion is not going to be the same opinion as the person sitting next to you. That is okay, but it's the way you handle that disagreement is where, like, we are failing, in my opinion, as a nation, where you can't really have now just discourse without becoming angry discourse, and it should not be like that. It's okay.
I mean, when you're dealing with partnerships, I guess you keep your personal opinions to yourself, or is that what you're
Exactly. I mean, in terms of, especially in the way we have this heightened political world, where something that you say may be very offensive to a partner, that's the last thing you want, to lose a partnership based upon something that you stated either on social media or just a natural conversation that can be, taken out of context, and really, not in benefit for you all.
I think to me that we understand and respect each other's opinions, and like you say, we're not always gonna be on the same side, but to me, this means you're not gonna get into a spit fight, you know? Obviously, at the meeting, there's gotta be the decorum and the understanding, so if Selina's saying that, and I'm going, no, and then we're into it, back and forth, that's just a waste of time, and that's not what this is about. You should say, okay, I respect this, and I'll let you take that, and I'll take my own opinion, and then it's whatever the majority of the board's gonna do anyway.
I think the good board members, Cynthia, are those that take a vote, and even if they're on the losing side, they move on. Yeah. Mr. Flores, you want to take the next one?
I will report gross mismanagement, significant waste of funds, abuse of authority, threats to safety, violations of our ethics guidelines, rules, regulations, policies, and procedures, or other conduct that damages our integrity or reputation. I will report suspected violations of this policy to the Executive Committee. All reports of possible violations of this policy shall be promptly and fully investigated by the Executive Committee.
So, what does this mean to you?
Basically, I guess if any of us see something that it's not right and it's not in the best interest of our organization, or it's not something that they're, mismanaging something, we have the
And I think Terry kind of, I mean, I'm sure in her roles when she was with United, you get a lot of that, Terry, where people report something to you, but they say, but I'm just telling you, but don't do anything about it. I don't want to stir up a mess.
And then my duty is, I'm sorry,
No.
you told me, I'm moving forward.
So you got to not just disclose it, but realize that your disclosure, if you're saying that somebody, improperly took something,
And I have the duty to now.
then yes, you have to look into it, investigate. So parliamentary procedure, right off the bat, all I want to say, folks, is this is not law. Okay, so we get caught up in a lot of issues here about what is legal and what is illegal, and parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Order, can be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to go over this in a very broad stroke and really fast for you, because I don't want you to be caught up to say, if we didn't do this right, then we have to go back and we just, violated the law. No, you didn't. And I get that from board members and all sorts of places. So parliamentary procedures, Robert's Rules of Order, interchangeably called basically a way for you to conduct the meeting in an organized fashion, okay? And you have a lot the reason why parliamentary procedure is important is because it's to respect the rights of the minority, so the minority also has a voice within your meeting as well, and everybody is going to talk, but in an organized fashion, right? It's a proper flow of ideas, and it's going to structure your agendas as well. So let's go over some of the basic principles that you have. And the first one that I want to talk to you about is the quorum. The quorum is something I touched upon. It's very important that you recognize that without a quorum, you can't really do much, right? So, and the person that's going to be conducting the vote is going to be the chair. So the order of the business is going to be that's order of business is a fancy term for the word agenda, okay? That's basically under the Robert's Rules of Order. This is what your agenda usually looks like for any government body or any nonprofit. That you got from the very beginning, you call the order, you establish your quorum, and you go down all the way to your adjournment of the meeting. The quorum of the meeting is important because that's where you need to know like when people can take action on, and a quorum is necessary according to your bylaws, as you see there on the third bullet, for regular, special, and annual meetings. And if there's no quorum, this is the only two things that you can do. You recess the meeting or you adjourn it. You cannot really do much without a quorum of the members present. Now, the presiding officer, what he does is he calls the meeting to order, and he's the one that is governing over taking the motions that are basically put forth at the meeting. And I always tell a chairperson, remember, being a chair does not give you more authority. It gives you more responsibility at the end of the day. And be courteous to your board members. Some board members, so I've seen some board members graduate to become board chairs, and then they turn into a totally different person. And I'm like, whoa, what just happened, right? So instead of saying, well, you're out of order, you could say that motion is out of order. Be courteous in the governing of your meetings. And of course, you can't you can't do anything without a motion. And that motion is basically what is going to, whether or not you're going to purchase the tables, the chairs. That's what you start off. So how do you handle a motion? Very easy. The chair recognizes the member. Terry Ramos wants to make a motion. I move that blank. And then is there a second? I second the motion. And then if there's a motion and a second, then the chair says it has been moved by Terry Ramos, seconded by Cinta Mares. And now there's discussion. Remember, you're not going to have discussion without a motion and a second. Okay? Motion, second, discussion. And then there being no further discussion, the motion is denied. The motion is granted, whatever the case may be. So procedure for handling the motion is there. I also have put together a cheat sheet for you that's laminated, which I think hopefully can give you a good way to go through these parliamentary rules quickly. The debate, in terms of debate, yes, you can debate all you want, but if you say we've had enough of debate, there's a way to close the debate, but it requires 2/3 vote. And there's a lot of different motions that can be made, okay? And I'm just gonna stop here because I'm not gonna go through all of this. This is just more for the chair, for you, but just realize this, and it's easier for me to explain it this way. So let's say, for example, you wanna purchase a table. You make a motion to purchase the table, somebody seconds it. And then at that point, somebody says, well, no, I think we need to purchase 2 tables. So he says, well, I'd like to make an amendment to that motion. Instead of 1 table, I want to purchase 2 tables. Then no board member says, I second that motion. So at that point, then the chair says, okay, do we have any other motions? There's no other motions. So which motion is taken up first? The second motion is always the one that's taken up first. If that motion fails, then you go down to what they call the main motion. If that motion passes, then that's it. You don't go down to the main motion anymore. Okay, so you get me? So always realize that just because you stated a motion first does not mean that your motion is going to be acted upon. It's actually the secondary motion that is acted on, and then you go, and then if that fails, then you go down to the main motion. You get me? Mm-hmm. Go, Cynthia.
Real quick, so the maker of the motion, and then there's a second, and then I decide to amend the motion, so I say I will like to amend it. The one that seconded has to be also the one to accept the amendment because they seconded.
Correct. Yes. So again, all sorts of these privilege motions and so on and so forth. I don't want to go through each and every one of them in the interest of time. I kind of want to go down to the ones that usually give us a little bit of heartache because I still know that call for the question. This is one. I have been, and I think maybe you're experiencing a little bit of that, where people want to debate the purchasing of that table for an hour. No. Okay? This is motion second. So long as there's enough debate, any one of you can say, Mr. Chair, I call for the question. Yeah, some people tend to repeat themselves over and over. We don't need to be hearing your opinion 10 different times, 10 different ways. Okay? But remember, if you basically say, I call for the question, then that's it. It stops the debate. Immediately stops the debate. It does require 2/3 to pass, not a majority. So if Terry says, I want to call for the question, I make a motion to call for the question, Cynthia says, I second, then at that point, you have 2/3. If you don't have 2/3, then you still have to continue with that table discussion, okay?
And just important to note one, because when usually the misconception with call for the question, the chair typically says, all right, there's already call for the question, and the vote is taken. And the vote is actually for seizing the debate and not for the motion at the table, right? And then the secondary motion has to take place if that passes.
Mm-hmm.
That's sometimes a misconception. It's voted on even, I don't know if at the college, but at the city, and we've seen where it's called for the question and we take the vote, but that's actually for seizing debate and not for the actual motion at the table. So we need to be careful with that.
And by you saying the chair, does that mean
You,
president?
Mm-hmm.
president, yeah. The
Chair,
president,
not the chair of the committee.
no. When you get to the meeting, the chair of the committee plays no administrative role, no officer role, other than.
So then I'm going to skip on to this other one that I see frequently, motion to table, motion to table. I see that a lot. But people do not, it is not debatable, folks. I have seen city, county, all over the place where school districts, where they make a motion to table, somebody seconds it, and then they still keep on debating. Like, no, a motion to table is not debatable. Once you say a motion, second, then at that point, the vote is taken whether or not that item is going to be tabled or not, okay? And again, requires majority votes to pass, okay? So, and last but not least on this, adjournment. Sometimes people don't really want to be at a meeting, and after 30 minutes, they say, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. But you say, but we have all like 10 other items on the agenda. Well, if somebody makes a motion to adjourn, again, not debatable. You got to take a second right away. It requires a second.
Cosa no has dicho?
And then that's it, and then you adjourn. But also remember that at the end of the meeting, and this is just a little thing, but the chair really, you could say, okay, being that there's no other business, this meeting is adjourned. But some people want to do it more formally. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Is there a second? So on and so forth. So it's up to you. But at the end of the meeting, you can really adjourn the meeting without a motion.
So even if we haven't discussed all the items on the agenda, somebody can just say.
Yeah, but it requires majority to pass.
Still requires a vote.
Yeah, yeah. So moving forward, the minutes, important, all the other things.
So it takes 2/3 to stop discussion, but just the majority to end the whole meeting.
Yes.
And stop.
Yeah.
For the whole meeting, not the specific.
Yeah.
Yeah. So minutes, I get a lot of issues with minutes because, again, folks, if somebody's doing the minutes, be kind to him or her if it's not perfect, okay? Because some people get very testy when I was not here. Why did you put my name? And no, I mean, you could revise the minutes or make sure they're reflected in what was proper. But it is really what is done. It's not a verbatim transcript of your meeting, okay? That's really what the minutes should reflect. And you could correct the minutes at any time, okay? So again, more of an overall thing. It should not be a, very, very particular item by item. These are just to kind of finish wrapping up. Common mistakes that we see, asking for additions, deletions, or corrections on minutes. Unless so moved to make a motion, use I move that. Approving the treasurer's report, well, not really needed, but you can if you want to. Reporting too much information on meetings, and using old business on agenda instead of unfinished business. Yeah.
Juan, can you explain to us the difference between deferring and tabling, an item, or is that not used anymore? You say, I want a table, but table means it's gonna go into infinity and nobody's gonna bring it back until somebody fixes it.
Exactly.
You say, I wanna defer to the next meeting.
Yeah.
That means you gotta bring it back, specifically.
Every time that I kind of jump in when I'm at a meeting, I never say I recommend to table. No, I would say I move to postpone, I move to defer to the next meeting. Tabling is a whole other thing. Then you have to lift it from the table if you want to be in accordance with a board, Robert's Rules of Order. It's a little too technical for me. I'd rather just use defer, postpone. Raul.
Can you explain the mistakes a little further?
Sure. Yeah. So asking for additions, deletions, or corrections on minute meetings. You don't have to say I think that this meeting, we need additions, deletions. Like a correction covers everything. And I think a correction is a softer way to say they're wrong. And I like to just correct the minutes in this fashion. Instead of saying, I would like to delete this whole thing. I think that that's just a little thing. So using, you read an agenda item and then and instead of saying, I move that, you just say, so moved. Second, no, so you need to state your motion, okay? The agenda item to discuss action to take action to purchase 10 tables. You say that's read and you say, so moved. No, say, I move that L.I.F.E organization purchased, like you state your whole motion. Approving the treasurer's report, you don't need to approve the treasurer's report technically. It just basically is filed for audit purposes. And again, it's not a verbatim transcript of the minutes. It should just be basically just enough of what was done and a little bit of what is said, not every single thing. And unfinished business is really the correct term instead of old business on an agenda. Okay, that's really just a technicality that I see often. Yeah, Terry?
Juan, for the minutes, I know that many times there's a motion on the floor, then they amend the motion, and the amended motion is the one that passes. So when I write the minutes, I just go with the amended. I don't even do the, is that
That's fine.
correct?
That's
I
fine.
don't need to,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah.
I just wanna make sure, cause I don't even go with it was amended, just what was passed.
That reflects the action taken by the board.
Okay,
We
instead,
have
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, go ahead.
No, we have our agenda, college, where it's just the item, and then over here it just says, let's say, approve, the item was to, do the parking lot in the South Campus. So then it was just motion made by Cynthia Mata, seconded by Selena, to approve the purchase or the paving project, and that's all. That's all it goes. Because you have a record, because it's been videotaped. And anybody wants to challenge it or whatever, there's a video.
But ours are not videotaped.
Huh?
Ours are not
No,
videotaped.
but she tapes them.
But we don't maintain the record, that's the thing.
I have them all.
And the same for the computer.
But anyway, yeah, simplified versions.
Is there I guess a slide one for executive session and we're not there yet? Cause I had a question.
Not yet, but we'll get there. I have a whole thing on that. Yeah.
And just so everybody, so we don't need a motion to approve the treasurer report.
Right.
So we're here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're gonna take no. So the report is generated by the staff. We do reconciliations, and simply what we do is release the balances on every account.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that based on what we're getting here, what I'm gonna do is change it to where if you have a president's report, you have to submit it to me. If I'm gonna report something, and we're gonna include that as part of the board packet with your agenda.
Mm-hmm.
You do it at home. It's still gonna be there. Yeah, but if no one has any questions, then we just move forward to item number 1, and we forget about our reports.
Yeah.
So the balance sheet will be now emailed. Yeah.
So real quickly on, and I know it's a little bit running behind, but you have here in tab number 2, new thing to you and to your eyes, which is your board operating procedures. I am going to try to cover as much as I can, and it'll cover, some of the issues that we've been discussing today. These are I just put 3 or 4 slides of like the major things that I kind of see out there that are included already in your board operating procedures that will not take effect unless you put them on an agenda in the future and approve them, okay? So these are just kind of like, they're draft for you, all right? But this is one that, again, it's included in your board operating procedures. It says board members will direct their individual request for detailed or sensitive non-agenda information to the executive director or board president. I find that that is a very good way of making sure that you're holding really one person accountable, right? Which is your executive director, and board members should just go to one person, not the entire staff of the organization. But if you request something, then it's going to be provided to you and every single board member in the interest of fairness and transparency. If the requested information is not available or cannot be really done as fast as could be, then it could be placed as an executive session item. Sometimes board members request like reports and reports and reports, and it's like too much. Like, we want to get you the information, but maybe we need to discuss it as a board to see if everybody wants reports for the last 5 years. And if the board determines that the request for information should be honored, then it will tell the executive director at a meeting, you have so many days, months, or whatever to put it together, okay? Vendor relations is another one that, again, in your board operating procedures. Bottom line, folks, yes?
Can we go back to the previous?
Sure.
So our bylaws allow for the membership to also submit requests for information. They have the right to inspect finance statements as paying members. Would you recommend or suggest that any request from the membership be treated the same way?
Mm-hmm.
It comes in as a request. I don't unilaterally release the information. I take it to the board as an executive session item. We discuss it, and the board ultimately, because the membership elects them, determines whether or not the record should be released, or are we bound to releasing the record to a member because the bylaws allows them to inquire?
You're going to have to release it, but if it's just supposed to be what is there in the bylaws. If they're requesting something that is not set out of the bylaws, then I would take it to the full board prior to release.
Or we amend the bylaws to say
Yeah.
exactly this. It is taken to the board, and if the board determines that it should be released to the membership, then it
Absolutely.
Because the least thing we want is to have someone pay their membership, right, to just try and get information.
Get your financials.
To defame the organization or release our
So the reason we put that in there was because there was previous boards that were not providing that information.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to. Remember,
know.
you're a private organization.
I
You don't have
understand
to.
that, but they were taking advantage of the organization at that time, and so we wanted to be very transparent, and we're not hiding anything.
Mm-hmm.
What we're doing.
But what happens if you get one of those old board members, pay their membership, and want to do exactly what you mentioned, and wants to get your finances, wants to inquire about ethics complaints, wants to
Mhm.
inquire about grievances at the fair, they can do whatever they want with that information once you release it to them. And that is where the organization is put in jeopardy.
I thought it was only finance information.
Even if it's finance. Even if it's finance, you have that one person who wants to hurt the organization, right? What do you do at that point is what I'm bringing forward, right? And right now, we're required to releasing everything, right? I mean, look, right now, you have, because I guess, I'll use myself as an example, right? You have certain watchdog groups talking about, oh, he's making X amount of dollars as the executive director, which wasn't true, right? But now you can have anybody come in and say, finances, I want everybody's salaries. I want to know if a board member got a reimbursement. I want to know X, Y, and Z. And what I'm saying is that could be misconstrued to damage the image of the organization, right? And although you're never going to control who the chair is or who the board is, but that is why the membership controls who they elect to the board. So if you have a board that does not merit I guess, the position of being a board member, then it goes back to the membership because you all elect the members. Now it's much more difficult to have a voting right. Before,
Mm-hmm.
people would come in and say, here's a $3,000 check, I'm buying 100 memberships, and here's the 100 names.
Wow.
And that's how they would get the board members elected. We've done away with that. That's why now you're required to volunteer. You're required to work in order to vote people in. So I think that with that in itself, you scrutinize who's on the membership, who's on the board, and we can now put stricter, I think, measures on what gets released to the membership, in my opinion, but it's up to you.
That's definitely a point to consider because I think most of your funding is coming from private sources, and some people want to make sure that their information remains private. So you don't want the third person coming in here and maybe getting that information just for nefarious purpose.
Can simply get a hold of Florida donors.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't stop them to going to them and saying, look, we have a similar program and this is our proposal, and you're going to start losing donors potentially.
Right.
That's my concern.
So that's something to bring up. Just real quick on vendor relations. Again, if there's any type of bid proposal out there, then you need to make sure that you're not, in cahoots with the vendor or been talking to the vendor about that. If somebody brings you a complaint about something going on at L.I.F.E, then obviously refer that citizen over to the executive director for handling. And at the end of the day, the executive director is going to review the information, examine it, and bring you a report to see whether or not there was any truth to that complaint about fraud or harassment or whatever the case may be. You're courteous to everybody, but don't get involved in the minutia of it. They bring you a complaint saying, I need to report it to the executive director, and then they'll be coming back to see if there's any credence to this particular allegation. And same with an employee. If an employee brings you a complaint as a board member, courteous, receive it, refer it to executive director, and it goes back to the executive director, will inform the board member of, well, this is really what was going on with the complaint that you received. It just establishes a good chain of command. And the role of the board and the authority of the board. So basically, and I keep on repeating this, your status as a board member really is here at a meeting where you are in convening, where you take action as a board. No board member has any authority over the staff, over equipment, over personnel, except as the board dictates, right? Board members should address or direct employees regarding performance duties. Really, it's going to be to the executive director, right? The board president presides the meeting, vice president, individual board members. If somebody questions you about something that's going on at L.I.F.E, you can't speak on behalf of the board unless you've been authorized to speak on behalf of the board. You need board authorization. And in terms of discussing kind of like what's going on at L.I.F.E. Again, that's not something that is allowed unless you've been, authorized to do so. And anybody's employment, assignment, compensation, all that stuff is private and should be disclosed only between you all, not the whole public. And as you see here today, what I told you, you're not governed by the Open Meetings Act, you're not governed by the Public Information Act. So what you have to say is indeed private. So I am going to direct your attention. I don't have a PowerPoint for this. This is going to be tab 2. I'm going to go over some of the important parts of your operating procedures. And as you see here, you have a, table of contents. I'm going to go over the things that I think are pretty important. The first one is on page 1 is about the board meeting agendas and board meetings. And I want to direct your attention to, it's page 1, it's there at the bottom. Yeah, page 1, you can flip up a little bit, yeah. So tab 2, subsection 2 talks about any voting member may request that a subject be included on an agenda for a meeting. That request shall be forwarded to the board president and executive director at least 7 calendar days prior to the regular meeting. So if you want an agenda item, it is okay. But, agenda items sometimes do require time and effort on behalf of the staff to put that information together. That's why we're saying give it at least 7 days before. If you give it 3 days in advance, then it's probably not going to make the agenda, especially if you want reports and so on and so forth, okay? So that's important. Subsection 6, it says the executive director, he's going to give you the backup information to that agenda item 3 calendar days prior to the meeting so that you have enough time to look it over and see if this is something that is in agreement with you. And then I think we talked about consent agenda on subsection 9. It talks about the items that can be put as part of the consent agenda items as well. So moving forward on page 2, so number 3. Page 2, subsection on questions about agenda number 3. Requests for additional materials relating to regular board meeting agenda items shall be made at least 1 business days, but not less than 8 hours prior to the beginning of the meeting. In other words, look at what you have, read it, and if you have any other questions or more information that you want, you can do so, but do it at least 1 business day prior to the meeting, okay? And if not, it's probably going to have to wait till the other meeting. So now, page 3 at the very top, preparation for meetings. Page 3 at the very top, it says you're going to be given the materials 3 working days in advance of the meeting, as you see there, number 1. Number 2 is pretty simple but very important. Board members should read and study the packet prior to each meeting. That's what trumps up a lot of very long meetings where people really show up. What was this about? You got to read stuff. That's part of being a good board member. Conduct of meetings, board member conduct at meetings, committee meetings, public forums. Not really going to go over that because we kind of talked about it, but that's basically at the bottom line is courteous, be respectful, and on page 4, subsection 6, it says 6A, all discussions shall be directed solely to the business currently under deliberation. Do not be caught up in trying to tackle everything out there under one particular agenda item. Whatever the item is, stick to that. And that's the responsibility of the chair. But if the chair sometimes does not call it, then other board member can say, I think we're moving away from the agenda item. Can we go back to we're talking about tables on the agenda, and now we're talking about an auditorium. Stick to the agenda. So,
And that could be addressed at the point of order one?
Absolutely, just as a point of order. So on page 5, member decorum and social media policy. I want to direct your attention to number 2. As community figures, board members shall be held to the same professional and ethical standards that apply to board meetings and public forums in their personal use of social media. If you're going to be out there vaping, if you're going to be out there drinking, if you're, all of these things, definitely you have the right to do whatever you want on your own time. Just realize that if you do something that is negative against a vendor or against a family, then they're going to use that information, those pictures, for a nefarious purpose. And we really don't want that. So that's why, this is something new that we put into our board operating procedures for our clients, because we had to, because we had a lot of people sometimes like almost posing nude and being public officials out there. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not really what we want. So, and number 7 is also, under that same policy, number 7, social media communications about board meetings, outcomes, and discussions shall be limited to the information which was disseminated during the open portions of the meeting. So if you're going to talk about what happened at L.I.F.E, make sure it's accurate and make sure it is basically based out of what was happening there. So vendor relations, we're going to skip communications. So let's go to page 7. On the very bottom, it says communications. So there it says kind of the executive director will communicate with all board members periodically via the board information packet. And that could be done once a week, twice a week, once a month. Like, this is really what's going on that really did not make the board meeting agenda, just so that you all keep on top of what was going on. And page 8 at the top, it says the executive director will communicate requested information to all board members. So whatever one board member gets, everybody's going to get. And I think that's just fair for everybody else. So number 11 is important. The L.I.F.E board encourages input. However, anonymous calls or letters may not receive the board's attention. I do not like for people to file anonymous complaints. We do a whole investigation and there was no truth or reality to it. Okay, don't be chasing rabbit trails of people that don't have the gumption to put their name behind a complaint. If you're going to be accusing me of something, I should know who you are at least. Okay, so number 8 at the very bottom, page 8 at the very bottom, it says basically the relationship between the board and the executive director. It should be a relationship built on trust, as you see there on subsection 1. And, basically be a harmonious one. And speaking frankly, and it's always good to have constructive criticism, but do it in a way that I always tell people, reprimand in private and praise in public, and what my mom always taught me, you treat others the way you want to be treated. That's, I think, besides all this legal stuff, that's really should be it. On page 9, it also talks about communication with counsel. I say that repeatedly to clients. The best way to control legal fees is to have one person designated instead of 15 people calling, because then that's just going to drive up your costs. Communication with the media, at the end of the day, on page 9 at the bottom, the board president is going to speak to the media about things that go on at a board meeting, if it's going to be a sensitive topic. But really, for everything going on in number 2, it's going to be the executive director or whoever the executive director designates to be what's going on with respect to L.I.F.E operations. And if you receive number 4 at the very bottom of page 9, you receive a call from the media requesting information, direct that caller to the board chair or to the executive director. On page 10 at the very bottom, what about closed session? People always want to know what's going on in closed session. And we talk about the board of directors understands that what is there at the very bottom of page 10 is that it is strictly confidential. Page 11 at the top, and it does say, if there is a statement to be made about what happened in closed session, it should be by the board chair. And it's going to be probably carefully phrased so that things are not repeated as to what happened in closed session. And number 3, on page 11, it does talk about, keeping confidential information confidential and not repeating it to third parties. Visits to L.I.F.E, again, welcome on page 11. They're encouraged, as you see there, but give the executive director 24 hours notice in advance at least, because obviously there's a lot of other things going on and you don't want to take away from those operations that may be going on. And you are also going to go through all the procedures that visitors go through, because I think that that's just an interest of fairness. Page 11 at the bottom, evaluation of the executive director. It does say that that he should be evaluated at least 6 weeks prior to his annual anniversary hire date. So there should be at least an annual evaluation. If you don't have a good instrument and you need an instrument, then let me know and I can give you instruments for that. Page 12 at the top. Number 6, it says, within 30 days of completing the evaluation, the board and the executive director shall meet and agree upon the evaluation criteria to be used for the following year. The worst thing to do is give an evaluation and not have follow-up. Hey, give the evaluation, and this is going to be what we're going to be concentrating on for the next whole year. And I always tell people, give SMART goals. Which could be single, measurable, they can be acted upon, timed, realistic. I always tell, don't ever give somebody 10, 15 goals. That's not going to happen. 3, 4 goals, measurable, when they're supposed to be, and that you're getting somewhere. Yes, Cynthia.
Well, I know we're a big board, but would it be a wise move to have each board member individually evaluate the director and score on our own personal perspective and ideas, and then of course the president gets a composite of all of that, and then we can discuss that. But I think individually I can say I can rate him, from 1 to 5, 5 being the greatest and the best. But then there's also a section for what do I as a board member feel should be his goals, and what do we want him to achieve, as an organization, and what is going to be his role in there. I can say, well, I want him to increase the donations, I want him to improve, this, that, and the other. And, I find that as a useful tool. And then you put all that together in one instrument that is handed then to the director, and he looks at it, he evaluates it, and he can always just challenge or have, issues about it. But I think you also set forth the goals for the following year, like you said. You set the parameters.
Yes and no. Okay, so this is kind of the way I'd like to do evaluations of CEOs. Everybody gets their instrument. You get a packet prepared by the executive director or staff about, this is the year in review, because people sometimes only want to gauge an executive director's performance by the last 15 days instead of the whole year. Usually that could be, newspaper clippings, so on and so forth. You get it, you score it, submit it over to your chair. The chair then, I can provide you. What we do is just a spreadsheet. You have 1 through 15, and you have, for example, 8 domains here. You list out the domains. Okay, Terry is number 1, and she gave 3, 5, 4, 3, whatever number she gave down the line, and then the average. What I do is I throw out the highest and throw out the lowest, because sometimes people want to rate somebody as Jesus Christ and then other ones as he's comatose. So you got to throw out the ones at the corners, right? And in terms of the comments, I think it is very unfair to give all of the comments on the summative evaluation to the executive director, because some people are going to have 20 million comments for everything. And what he or she may think may not be reflective of the majority of the board. So the evaluation should be really, whatever comments should be made should be basically that the majority of the board agrees with those comments being the one that the executive director is given. Yes,
And I know
yes.
that's a very common pitfall, which you just mentioned a little while ago. when you tend to remember the bad thing that just happened a month ago and say, no, but they didn't do this, they didn't do that, but wait a minute, we're talking about the whole year. From the last evaluation to as of today, what has happened, what have they accomplished or not accomplished?
Right.
Not only what happened yesterday that he pissed you off, and so you're upset now, you say, well, no, he didn't do it, wait a minute. That's a very common pitfall. Board members, we
Juan, I
tend to
have a
do.
question.
Yeah.
What if what's listed here in the procedures conflicts with my contract? For example, my contract says that, my evaluation, is conducted by the board president and the people he appoints to what my contract says is a negotiations committee.
Mm-hmm.
And then that committee presents to the board the findings, and then the board collectively decides whether or not they go with what the president and his committee, determined, whether it's goals, compensation, or the score of the evaluation, but here we have it set a bit different.
Yeah. It's basically your contract has to govern, and we have to,
supersedes this.
yes, we have to change this to be in line with your contract, or you agree to an amendment of your contract to reflect this. So look it over, and then you tell us, we're going to stick with the contract, so therefore we have to update these operating procedures, or we're going to, do a hybrid. But
And if my contract, says something, I mentioned to the board that my evaluation happens, during the month of April.
Mhm.
We renegotiate the terms. Even though the contract says one thing, I inform the board, and correct me if wrong, if both of us agree to amend the contract and take something else into consideration, and it's allowed,
Mhm.
and it's not just strictly what the contract says. So if I want to propose something added and the board doesn't agree, then it stays with what the contract
Oh,
agreement
yeah.
is. But if we both agree, then we can amend it.
yeah,
Correct.
contract has to be offer, acceptance, and consideration, so it has to be, meeting of the minds. So number 13 at the bottom, the role of the board in executive session. The board can only discuss those items listed on the executive session agenda as prescribed by law. 13, page 13 at the very bottom.
Okay.
It says role of the board in executive closed session. It says that the board can only discuss those items listed on the executive session item agenda as prescribed by law on page 14 at the very top. During executive sessions, the board can deliberate properly posted items but may not take action related to those items. All board action, including voting, must be occur in open session. And then I highlighted and I put it all in caps for you about confidentiality, right? So if you do not like what another one of your board members, how they're behaving, on page 14, there is the procedure. And the procedure is pretty simple. You go talk to that person, first. Then if you can't get anywhere with that person, then you involve the board chair. And if that does not work, then probably that item is going to have to be placed on an agenda for the full board to air out how we can kind of rectify this situation. Okay? Mm-hmm.
You just mentioned then that, so I think, I don't know if Terry or Hugo or Fernando or even Joe want to chime in on this, right? Because I think it's important. Right now, the way we handle situations are very different than what Juan is recommending. So the board knows in its entirety, right? So, what would happen? So right now, if something comes up, it goes through the executive committee, right? We do have, an ethics committee
Mm-hmm.
that then evaluates the situation. If indeed the executive committee deems it necessary to go to ethics, or the executive committee kills it, and it doesn't get to the entire board to avoid any type of defamation of a board member or anything to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
Do we continue that practice, or are we going to shift it to what you're recommending?
I do like if you have a problem with me, talk to me first. Maybe it's something that I said via text or an email that really struck you bad, that, let's talk about it each other. Because sometimes when you start getting into committees and agendas and stuff, it can become a bigger issue. That's what I would recommend. It's up to you, though. That's not.
So you bring in the board member the way we're doing it now.
Yeah,
with the executive
or
committee?
just, Cynthia, Terry,
His idea is basically.
informal resolution. Yeah.
They talk about it directly, but then if they can't come into an agreement or solve their issues, then they can come back to the executive
Right,
committee.
but then,
I think the way we have this executive committee established.
But then listen to what he's recommending.
Right.
He's saying, then it goes to the board of directors, right? So what I'm saying is, right now, you all send it to the ethics committee, right? And if it can be resolved within the executive board or the ethics committee, it ends there, right? And the only way something gets to the entire board right now structurally is if the ethics is going to recommend removal of a board member. But if not, the problem doesn't get aired before all 15 members, right? To avoid what you just mentioned. So it first gets sent to, let's say, the president, right? Or you air it out amongst yourselves. But if that can happen, then the president gets called and the executive committee meets. So now you're involving 4 people,
Yeah.
right? And if those 4 people can resolve it, then it goes to the ethics, right? And ethics is 3 members, right? And if the ethics can resolve it, then it gets to the board. Do we keep those
Yeah.
steps in place, or do you recommend that it gets eliminated?
I like that, but I would rather also do a hybrid. First, board members, you talk to one another. That doesn't work out, do a little session, coffee with the board chair and them two, like a mediation session. That doesn't work, then you go to your ethics, okay? That way it doesn't really go to ethics right away, you know?
So we keep, and the reason I bring this up is there was going to be an item at today's board meeting to eliminate which didn't make it to the agenda, but to eliminate all that screening, and the interpretation of the chair at that time was, if there's an ethics committee, it should come to me and avoid everybody else, right? But I guess we don't do that, right?
Well, yeah.
We try to resolve it before it becomes an official ethics complaint, an official board item.
Informal resolution is always best, you know?
Juan, can I go back a little bit to the executive session items? Some of our board meetings, when I first joined, it just says, we're gonna discuss, the activities for L.I.F.E, and then it just is maybe half possible executive session. And so when we get the agenda, I say, I move that we go into executive session. I don't feel comfortable with that. I much rather have an agenda, and you know that you need to discuss these in executive session, and following your regular agenda should be executive session items. And then you list them, and then that way you tackle them, take them out of whatever.
Yeah, I always tell people, when you have an executive session, it's no different than an open session. Whatever you're going to be discussing in open session is agendized. So should a closed session agenda item. Now, during the course of the meeting, sometimes it does happen that, this agenda item, we need to discuss it in closed session. That's about, let's say, security or something like that. You don't want to be discussing security in open session for the whole world to hear, right? So you can take it into executive session. But a good agenda should have those items already anticipated that are going to require closed session discussion, specifically posted as such. Yes. And what about, last but not least, sure.
Before we move up to executive session, the question I had when I interrupted you earlier was, right now, we're not recording executive session discussions. Should they be recorded?
No.
So we continue.
Yes, just take notes, because that's sometimes those recordings can get into the wrong hands, and there's no need for you to kind of like, I always tell people, we can defend you, but and probably soften off what the truth is. But if we have it in a recording, it's gonna be very hard to walk away from that. Somebody misspeaks and stuff, it's gonna be, there. So, yeah. So, violation of board operating procedures at the very bottom of page 14, the last thing, in terms of, and I think, I was asked about what happens if we violate these procedures. On page 15, 3A, you could publicly reprimand the board member. 3B, you can recommend additional training for that board member. 3C, you can authorize the board president to remove the board member from a particular position, or, and 3D is you limit the board members' communication abilities, right? So, and at the end of the day, obviously, hopefully it doesn't get to that point where you have to remove a board member, but you have your procedures for a reason. Yes, Albert.
So, just for clarification purposes, these remedies, who determines the actual consequences? The entire board, the executive committee by vote, the board president? Because I think it's important that we identify.
Normally it's the majority of the board members present at a meeting.
So a situation arises between 2 board members, it can get resolved, it goes to ethics, it's not going to be removal. Then executive committee determines X board member should be reprimanded. Then there's an executive session item to present to the entire board what happened, and the board will then vote whether the reprimand or whatever consequences listed here get sanctioned.
Right. So, and moving forward on tab 3, you have this confidentiality agreement. This confidentiality agreement is something that my firm, we put this together for our clients, and it basically just goes to the issue of, as a board member, I'm going to keep things confidential. And these are the reasons why. So I like this confidentiality agreement. Again, it's not something that people are going to take you to the courthouse over, but it keeps you honest. It keeps the organization running with integrity. And I really do think that I recommend this for any public entity or private nonprofit entity as well. And the next tab, I'm not going to go over all of that. Tab 4 is your TOMA. Let's talk about this. Before I get into this, I want to just talk about it real quickly with you, because the Texas Open Meetings Act does not apply to you, as I told you, but you could choose to follow it if you want to. If you choose to follow TOMA, though, it is a law that's very sticky and can get you into issues if it's not done appropriately or not, it doesn't kind of follow correctly. So TOMA applies to political subdivisions, cities, counties, municipalities, and stuff like that. So at the onset, I think I'd like to have that discussion with you. Is this something that you want to adhere to? And if so, what are the benefits? What are the cons of doing it? You
follow it or you don't follow it?
Well, I mean, you could call it a hybrid, but I would really, once you kind of put the thing about open meetings, then it's open meetings. It's 551 of the Texas Government Code, and it has all sorts of stuff to it.
Letters and numbers and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Criminal implications, civil implications. That's what worries me.
I wanted to chime in a bit on this. I did, in conversation with Juan, we were, I guess, maybe under the impression that we had to follow TOMA, that we had to follow the
Public Information
Act, because we were receiving third-party funding from the county, right? So I did speak to Nathan Braden, who's the legal counsel for the county. He informed me you are not legally bound to following or incorporating TOMA or the Public Information Act. We do not have it in our contract anymore for third-party funding, so it's really up to the organization. I did reach out to the board president about, this discovery, and we had a very short conversation with the executive committee on whether or not we wanted to continue complying with TOMA or not. And the consensus of the executive committee, and that's why it's in the presentation today before you, was we want to continue promoting transparency. We want to be as held accountable as much as possible in order to ensure that there's public trust and confidence in the organization. So that's why it's before you today. Now, I don't know if the executive committee wants to elaborate a bit more on that. There's obviously pros and cons to it, right? And sometimes, even as public entities, there's times that you question yourself, and I'm using this as an example as a council member, and I'm sure Ms. Maris can say the same thing. You sometimes say, why is this even allowed to go out to the public, right? But TOMA allows it. And there's times that it's a slippery slope or it's sticky where you say, really, this is more business, it's private, but you've got to release it, right? And there's timelines, 10 days, and so on and so forth. So if we adopt this, I think the board can at any time suspend it, Juan, if I'm not mistaken, but you're not going to want to suspend it earlier in the middle of a request because it's going to make us look bad, right? So that needs to be determined whether we do it or not. And since we did have it adopted, I would always tell the board, remember, there's implications if you violate the Open Meetings Act, and the Open Meetings Act also includes executive session, correct?
Yes.
If you violate executive session, you talk to another board member about what happened in executive session if you weren't there, or you go to your friend, or you go have drinks with your family and you discuss that, and someone overhears it, they can come forward and file criminal charges against you with the district attorney, right? So we have to.
I mean, if you want a straight out recommendation from me, I have no trouble telling you, do not do TOMA, because like this is, you have these civil things here, and then all of these possible civil remedies, invalidate, back pay, criminal penalties. You could still do closed session, you could still do open session, you can kind of run it, but don't use those words in TOMA, because then that could give to somebody that comes and takes you to court, says, But here you said that you're, doing Open Meetings Act and stuff. Just it's your governing rules, just like Salvation Army of that board, just like the Ruth B. Cow, like
The confidentiality still applies.
yes, all of that.
But it's
You don't
just we're not
use
following the open meetings.
open meetings that has these criminal and civil implications that I battle with
And
all
because
the
for
time.
that same reason, on the agenda, I publish kind of what all entities publish, right? The disclosure that you can go to executive session. But I purposely don't quote 551.071 because if you quote it, then like Juan says, oh, you said you were going to follow it based on 551.071. Where is it, right? And now we get
Yeah.
ourselves into a civil legal matter.
So
When it was brought up with the intention of, hey, do you want to be a part of it? I guess on our end, it's the lack of knowledge of what TOMA
Right.
and legal implications. We were more thinking transparency. That's correct.
Correct.
So.
then you could still do transparency and all that
That's
stuff.
what I'm saying. So of course, maybe we're not saying we're gonna be TOMA, but we can apply to the bylaws or make any changes or something.
Well, now the
that
implications of a violation of TOMA, let's say executive session or the confidentiality, then just goes back to the procedures. And
Right.
instead of someone saying, you know what, I'm filing a complaint against you with the authorities, they file a complaint against the executive committee, and you're gonna get reprimanded, or you're gonna get removed from the board would be the worst thing, rather than paying a fine or getting a classy
Correct.
misdemeanor.
And so now I think the way it's being presented to us, I think probably we all have a change of heart or opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I think we still have the
Yeah, but knowing that
accountability
there's still a
we.
commitment and a pledge that there's gonna be consequences if there's a violation, right? It's not gonna be. a
Correct, but
free-for-all.
I'm just saying, we need to get, now knowing this, we probably don't wanna have TOMA involved, I think we're all.
Maybe we have our own internal type of transparency policy, which would be very similar to TOMA, and just changing the consequences to reference the
correct.
policy.
Yeah.
But we have a transparency
That's correct.
policy.
I think that's where we want.
Can we have like a memo or some sort of, like, what's the threshold of the web county funding where we can, like, if it's only a third of our budget, then we don't have to follow TOMA or whatever it is?
I
just
think
so
at this point, it's maybe not even 10%, we're like at 3%.
Yeah.
4%.
Oh,
But,
so it's
but,
not even anywhere near
It
the
doesn't need
threshold.
it.
Okay. And what would be the threshold?
It's case law, and it's basically, and I'll send you the case law, Raul.
Okay.
But and we can send it to the full board. We did that for the Chamber of Commerce in Zapata because if you have not kept up with what's going on over there, there was people that were submitting a lot of public information requests to the Chamber of Commerce because of one county commissioner in particular. And so they came to us about, like, do we need to release this information, re-govern? So there's case law that says unless you get money that you need to basically operate your nonprofit, that's kind of like the case law out there by the court. And in this case, any reasonable person can say 10%, well, we really don't need it. Without that 10%, we still will continue.
Now,
So we may want something from the treasurer saying, the money we receive, we don't need for
we
operations
could
or
say
whatever.
we have an increase of maybe 25 to 30% if the county's promotion comes through. I still think it doesn't need it.
No, I think
I
it's more like 50.
or more, correct,
Mhm.
is my understanding. And even though I think operations would be more personnel type of things, so operations means overall,
Mm-hmm.
because. the
Oh,
money that we
operations
get-
is all overall.
No matter where you use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the money we get from the county cannot be used for salaries, right? So to me, operations is like salaries,
Mm-hmm.
the operations of the office, right? We do, however, get the in-kind office space and utilities paid by the county. So that,
It's
to me,
fine.
they could put, we've seen agreements in the government entities where rent is $1, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
it's a public building, so I still don't even think we need that.
Yeah.
threshold.
I mean, not at this point.
Because could we make a mistake of voting not to go under TOMA when we really should have?
Mm-hmm.
That could-
Yeah.
that would be-
Yeah, that's why I think the best thing to do, because part of TOMA, Raul, is the affirmative defense to TOMA is to rely on an opinion given by an attorney. So I don't have problems giving you an opinion that it's my legal opinion that you don't have to prescribe by TOMA or TPIA because of the case law. I'll just give me your budget and I'll send you an opinion letter, and that kind of, that's your affirmative defense.
Yeah, and we may need that every 2 years, maybe,
Mhm.
whatever.
Yeah, I think I have it in this slide about, like, how do you get away from TOMA violations. participates. There you go, Raul. It is a provided defense to prosecution under this law if the trustee acted in reasonable reliance on a court order or written interpretation of TOMA contained in a court opinion, AG opinion, or an opinion from the district's, that's basically the entity's attorney. So that would be my opinion to you all. We'll put it down in writing, put it in your file, and you kind of do away with this TOMA issue.
Juan, I have another question, which maybe doesn't have anything to do with TOMA. But do we have an inherited obligation of open records because of the kids who participate in our organization come, I guess, the third party through the schools?
Yeah.
Right, so I think also we need to talk about the extra level of protection when we have records of minors, phone numbers, the money they get from our organization. I guess it's treated very similar to the school district's policies.
Yeah, well, the good thing, number one, that you don't have to subscribe to the TPIA. So if somebody sends you requested information about how did this kid end up winning this award and we won all the scores and stuff, all that is confidential. We can send it to the AG's office and saying TPIA does not apply to L.I.F.E for the following reasons based on funding. But in addition to that, when you talk about student stuff, remember, FERPA for school districts, which is the Family Education Right and Privacy Act, that you can't be disclosing information of students to third parties that don't have a reason to know. Usually you just disclose it to parent, guardian, and that's it. So.
Then the other question I did have, and I don't know if it becomes part of the operating procedures manual, is we incorporated last year an agreement that is signed between the parents and the organization to waive the right to sue us, because we've been sued before over a steer, over a judging, or a validation, over a pig, or whatever, right? And we've been taken to court, and the organization has spent thousands of dollars in attorney's fees, okay? Last year, Jose Luis Castillo recommended that we draw up an agreement to have the parents waive the right to a lawsuit and go into not mediation but
arbitration.
Is that something that you think we should continue? Because I know validations will start for the new year, so parents can sign that, or do we just stay away from it? Would you want to review that?
Well, no, I mean, you have to have experience with arbitration and litigation. A lot of clients come to that. That's a very new thing on employment disputes. People are kind of saying, if you have an employment disputes, a lot of private companies are saying you're going to resolve it through arbitration. Just realize this, arbitration is not free. Monica Knudsen, Joe Lopez, Becky Palomo, Oscar Hale are free to you because they're paid by taxpayers. Arbitration, the last one I went to, we had 3 at $600 an hour. They have to usually fly them in from Houston or Austin or San Antonio or Dallas. They come in. You got to pay for those costs as well. Their hotel. Yes, the rules of evidence don't apply, and it's kind of like in a room like this. But it could take time because you still have to put on witnesses and evidence and stuff like that. It is a more relaxed meeting, but I don't want to give you the impression that, we're going to save tons of costs.
There's a clause there that says that the losing party pays for all the expenses.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we feel would convince a parent to think twice about complaining, right? Especially because they may be frivolous.
Yeah.
So there's a clause there that says you lose, and it can also be us. They compensate our attorney's fees and the arbitrator's fees.
Yeah.
Right? So if L.I.F.E loses, we pay for their lawyer's fees and the arbitration fee. But if the parent loses, they have an obligation because they signed off to paying our attorney's fees plus the arbitrator.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously there's pros and cons.
Pros and cons to that. You can kick off.
Versus us being smeared.
That's a big.
Headline that we're the 341st District Court getting sued over a pig.
That's the arbitration. That's what a lot of people want that because it keeps things more private. Than obviously at the courthouse, everything can be is public record. But I do think that we have an excellent judiciary, in my opinion, here. That if they smell, we just did a motion for summary judgment on Thursday that we argued, and by the afternoon we had a favorable ruling because I think if you do put a nonsense pleading before them, and you can knock it out pretty fast without going through a whole arbitration thing. So, I mean, stick with what you have, but I just want you to know that
I'd
it.
like to review the case that we had before.
Yeah.
So that you know what it entailed.
Mm-hmm.
How fast it went to go through proceedings.
Yeah.
We were in the middle of a fair, and we went to court.
Yeah. Like an injunction.
Well,
From one day to the next
and
day.
thank God the judge had knowledge
Yeah.
of agriculture.
Of
Because
course.
it showed, because it's very difficult, even me, I mean, as a new executive director, I knew nothing of work, I still don't know many things. So it's
Yeah.
kind of complex, right, to even have the best lawyer understand the rules and our rules, because every fair has different rules. And I think that's why the recommendation of arbitration, and Jesse was actually the one that brought it up, a former board member, Jesse Coons, from a previous organization,
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, I guess it gives the arbitrator enough time to study our rules and things of that nature.
Right.
But it puts the burden on both of us, saying, hey, I think it creates an atmosphere where the organization has to be sure that we follow all the rules, that we do things right, because if they take us to arbitration, we're at loss of our lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
the parent's lawyer, and the arbitrator's fees, and that's probably a good $30,000, $10,000 fees.
Yep. 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 Yep.
Last time, what did the board spend? Just in that one hearing, $8,000.
Yeah.
And it was
So you don't
a-
have any insurance for any of that? Or
We have general liability insurance, but not for that.
No, not for that.
okay. Well, that's one thing where you should probably kind of maybe review your stuff, because there's riders for insurance policies can be super, super cheap to get, and they can cover a lot more than what you have.
In fact, we're reviewing our insurance policy.
It could be probably hundreds of dollars more. I'm not talking about thousands of dollars. And when I say hundreds of dollars, I'm talking about a lot bigger operations than you. So talk to your insurance agent. Tell them, what do we have? More importantly, what are the exclusions? And what if we want to just tell them, this is the lawsuit we have. Can you give us a rider that would cover this type of lawsuit in the future? And see what they can do for you, okay? Before you decide to go either way, because if it's going to be covered by insurance, then. And obviously work with your deductible, because if your deductible, sometimes you can pay a little bit higher premium and bring your deductible way down. An organization like this should have a deductible of $4,000, something like that. You should not be having $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 deductibles. So look at those issues.
Maybe we can consider also getting the parents to release claims.
Oh yeah,
Consideration for going, instead of just arbitration, just
release.
Now I have a lawyer on the board, I'll send you the arbitration agreement.
Yeah. And I can send you, Raul, and you can kind of work with the releases we have. We have tons of them, and just rework it.
A release with the arbitration clause, the arbitration agreement, and maybe we just at least.
Yeah.
See, before the lawsuit, we didn't have anything. Okay?
Yeah.
And then we started putting something into play. And so, it's probably the first time the board ever got sued.
The first time I've ever gotten to that.
Oh, yeah, court, yeah.
Never did.
I don't think it's gonna scare too many
It's a
parents
privilege,
away,
right?
right?
That just costs.
They sign off on agreement.
But it costs us money.
That's what I'm saying. It costs a big pretty penny to.
Yeah.
So they can basically, they can sign off on an agreement and say, I'm entering your contest, but I'm waiving my rights to sue you.
Yeah.
Basically.
That's what we do for the lot of our organizations. Like, you want to participate in cheer, you want to participate in dance, it's okay, going, but you're going to have to sign releases and stuff. Now, there is disagreements among the courts that whether or not a parent or guardian can release a claim on behalf of his or her child. So, but those are things that at least it gives you protection. It's a deterrent for nefarious parents and guardians out there that like to sue. So I think it's good. Put it out there, and that way, if they do come with you with a claim, you say, hey, you signed this release.
I'll still add it to the rider, we can get a rider, but I'd like to have another.
That may lower your insurance. If they see that you have your release on it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we need to ensure, like I was just mentioning here on the sidebar to Selena, that every parent signs it. So it's going to be part of your validation or your entry fee, kind of like the IRS form, right? You sign it, you don't have that form,
Yeah, we need to have
You're
a
not gonna show it.
two-part.
You can.
Now that we have more time than we did last year, that we
Right.
were throwing it at them at validation when everybody's there with their animals and all of this, and some parents don't go and all of that, we need to have it as a two-part
and
entry
maybe when they
form.
pay for
With
the,
your entry
for the
form, you
fees,
turn in
they have
that
to fill
signed
out the
form,
IRS
or
form
else we
and
don't
the-
accept it.
Also for the student too, if they become 18 during this process too, because they need to be able to. we need to be
both,
able to
both
get
sign the
their
agreement.
place. Okay, yeah.
think at some point, all of this hopefully could be just done for you all electronically, because that's really the easiest way to get all of these things done.
The only other thing is that somebody, like if I'm signing something, I want a copy of it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the electronic method, it's hard
Or you
to.
could get emailed to you.
Well, DocuSign does have that, like where you could just, those are things that people are doing now.
Rental agreements like that through all the, with COVID, everybody, all the real
Yes.
estate agents are sending you DocuSigns and you sign it online.
That's the easiest thing. Just have to get a committee going for getting all of your stuff electronically, but that's another thing. Let me just finish up today's presentation with subsection tab number 5, number 3. If you go to question number 3 on tab number 5, tab 5, I want you to just kind of fill that out. I'll give you about a couple, 5-10 minutes. And the question for you is, what is your goal and or objective for being a board member, executive director of L.I.F.E? So if you guys want to think about that, I'll give you 5-10 minutes and then we can come back and discuss.
So since it's required that they do this, we have a folder for each board member. I made some certificates for you.
Oh,
to
cool.
sign. So we can put them in the file.
Mhm.
Some are going to go within the 5 days to watch the video.
Mhm.
So I'm going to pull those out and I'm telling
Okay.
you, I'll email them to you.
Sure.
So, let's see here.
Cool. All right. Ah. You want to go first?
Okay. So yeah, in being a board of director, I hope to help in making the organization one that is better for our exhibitors and students, and to aid in the improvement that will help us step out of our comfort zone and increase the number of students and the amount that is given back to them.
You think that you all need like a big increase of students participating, or what do the numbers look like?
We have started to see a slight decrease
Okay.
in the livestock communities.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get to see.
Just more encouragement, more outreach, that type of thing. Okay, good. Cynthia?
Mine is more of a general statement, and my goal and my objective, I see myself as to contribute to the improvement of the quality of life, not only for the community, but for the participants of activities that are put forth by L.I.F.E, while ensuring the safety and well-being of all those involved in our organization, as well as to promote unity, fellowship, and professionalism among board members and the board of directors, and to improve the image of L.I.F.E.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by image of life? Do you
Well,
think?
again, because of COVID, I think, people tend to, have forgotten about, who we are and what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And again, because of past incidents and occurrences, I think that some people hold on to those negatives, and this way they still think that, that organization is not really there to serve the community.
Mm.
It's all about them, the board's all about themselves, and what they bring forth are not, really in the best interest of the students, and, there's comments like that. So,
Yeah.
and with the COVID, since we all kind of went home and laid back, it's now hard to overcome those and make sure that, no, you can trust us. You can have faith in us because we're here to serve the community and help these kids, engage in maybe future careers and paths.
Media marketing is now paramount to any organization that wants to survive. And you know that media marketing, you don't do it by print media or by television media anymore. It's really what you have at your disposal, which is your phones, right? So it's always thinking outside the box for those, how do you reach people out there? And it has to be snippets of information and stuff like that. So I know your budgets are limited, but that's one thing where, a good media specialist, and I say the younger, the better. I mean, really, that's what I kind of have geared to. I had a whole marketing people over in Austin, and when I sat in front of them and, they did my website and stuff, they were like all like 20-year-old, 30-year-olds, and they're doing like for Whole Foods and all sorts of organizations. But yeah, you want to share yours? Thank you.
At the end of the day, I feel that as a board member, my responsibility is to vote to make things right and fair for kids. I don't know if all of us, but at least in my experience, I started out as a volunteer. So at the end of the day, you find out what it is these kids need and what it is that we need to do better in order to help them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's great that, because I think that's a good reflection to have on your board, right? People that kind of started as a volunteer and you've seen it from all sides.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of just, coming into a board and saying, oh, well, it has to be done this way or that way if you've never been out there,
Mm-hmm.
doing this stuff.
Right.
The hands-on experience.
Yeah. Albert, all good that you go.
So I wrote down, obviously, a bit different, right, than what we're going to hear from the board, but as executive director, to fulfill the mission and carry out the vision of the organization through the direction of the board, to serve the organization as best as possible, as I'm seeing as the leader outside of the board of directors, to also meet all the goals and objectives set forth by the people that govern this organization, but most importantly, to serve the youth and their families the best way as possible, and to bring more diversity in the activities we do in life so we can attract more people to the organization.
I mean, in a lot of ways, people now see you as the ambassador for this organization, right? So it's you have a lot of stuff riding on you to improve image and all this other stuff. So it's, everything that you do obviously is going to be a reflection of the organizations. Those are good points. Joe?
The golden objective is to, in my opinion, to increase the amount, both in numbers, increasing the number of students, and dollar amounts of the scholarship opportunities for the students, while engaging in a transparent and accountable board utilizing integrity, respect, and good faith.
Yeah. So scholarships, talk to me about that. You all been giving a lot of scholarships on a yearly basis?
We do, but I think we need to, and that's
Step
that
it
was
up.
my point is, I got $1,000 scholarship, and that was in 1993, and we're still giving $1,000 scholarships, and I think we need to, I mean, the economy has evolved, and I think we need to step up to the plate and donate more money to our children, because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing as a nonprofit, is raising money to give back to the community.
Yeah. Oh, scholarship is important.
So my goal for being a board member is to be part of an organization that is involved in molding our youth to be better citizens and future leaders. This organization gives our youth in our community a platform to do something positive and learn life skills that they will use for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. I think that a lot of my friends that participated in life, they still remember like what they did, and I think it's a lot about nurturing good citizens that care for others, so that they can, contribute to our community. Hopefully, they stay around, right, or go to college and become, members of a productive society. So I think that that's one of the best things of this organization, that you're accountable for a pig, for a, animal, and you know how to nurture and then be a good steward. So,
Well, I basically gave out my spiel, but yes.
okay.
Just a few minutes ago. But yeah, the animals don't feed themselves.
Yeah.
Teaches the children responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, my son had a goat, and he was the one waking me up to go give the goat a shot at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So it shows them responsibility to do something positive and take care of something and nurture and become one.
Yeah. Good. Terry?
Okay, so as a board member, I've definitely seen a big improvement. I started off as a parent, because I was always in sports, but my daughter loves the world. So we started to learn about rabbits, about goats, now lambs, and etc. So as a board member, I feel that our organization, and this is one of the goals, we haven't gotten there, but baby steps, but I'd like our organization to have ag sessions. If we're gonna have a fair, maybe we can have, one session of steers, what it takes, and bringing in those kids, the community, making it known, what is it that you have to do with steers, lambs, rabbits,
It's a good
goats,
idea.
poultry.
I like that.
And that way, we're reaching out to the community that we're following our mission, because our mission says, to promote. How are we promoting that?
Yeah.
If we don't provide sessions to the community?
Yeah.
So I would really like to do that.
And that can go back to what she said about increasing numbers.
That our livestock committee has already discussed, and this year when we had our meeting last month, that was something that a lot of our members really stressed, that they
need
want to
that.
try to get.
And that's what, we're promoting that mission. Well, then what better way than to have a Saturday session with the kids?
It's great.
And that's really what I would like to
Parent
do
comes
for
in and
this.
the kid tells them, I wanna raise a goat, what?
Yeah.
The parent doesn't know.
Hey, and life is, Saturday, everybody's invited, this is what it takes, so as a board member, I'd really like to establish that and.
Increase numbers, increase money for scholarships, so on and so forth. Yes.
Exactly, talk about the scholarships at that thing.
Yeah.
Basically what everybody's been saying.
Sure.
I want to, try and.
Ditto.
Motion to adjourn.
To make the fair as successful as possible, and to provide a very an educational and enjoyable experience for the public, and improve the quality of life.
Sure.
And also, as I think Wu said too, we're developing leaders. I'm not only a board member, but I'm also a 4-H leader. So I have my daughter looking at me and how am I handling certain situations, and so it's just a matter of being able to foster those leadership opportunities for not only within ourselves, but within our total organization.
Right.
So that way we can increase volunteerism as well, because we really need that. To help move move these things, a lot of the situations that come up during the fair to make it more successful.
And that thing about leadership, I think at least I remember that a lot of the Life kids were really good at academics as well. It kind of teaches you, it ties in some form or fashion, right? About responsibility, organization, so on and so forth. So, Finley?
Everybody.
Yeah.
No, great points, everybody, because you've taken a lot off my plate here. But also, something that hasn't been brought up with the opportunity that we have coming with the new county facility to set things up so that it doesn't fall back into the same old thing that it was before. To try to, we've got a new challenge here in how to set it up so it will be successful.
Yeah.
And to police ourselves, or to try to lock it up. And that's a bad way to put it. That sounds very wrong. But to try to safeguard it so that it doesn't fall into the same old thing that it was before.
Right.
Which is hard because there's always going to be a new way that something can be changed around. And that sounds so negative because I love what you brought up because that's something we have to re-educate the public that gotten so far away from agriculture. And I know that 30 years ago, whenever they were still coming out to the ranch whenever the elementary schools were still coming out to have their little their picnic day, that I'd have a calf, I'd have whatever animals we had around, I'd have them there so that they could pet them. These kids freaked out. They had never touched a horse before.
Wow.
They'd never actually been up close to one. I thought, this is amazing. I know your mom showed out at L.I.F.E. How have you never seen anything other than a dog or a cat? Mm-hmm. And so it's shocking.
But to me, it seems like you are on the right track. It seems like you have a very good board, energetic, community leader as an executive director. And it's important, if you don't want to go to the past, make sure that you know who is on your board, who's going to be joining the board, and are they going to really be involved with the mission, your purpose and stuff. That's one thing to keep it going, is to make sure, understand what you have, and don't let it go by bringing on the wrong people to this fine organization. Okay, you're keeping us from that Chick-fil-A, so.
That'll be real short. New year, I want to find out where the most help is needed.
Sure.
How I can help the most, and all with a mission in mind.
Yeah.
This is actually Raul's first.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So whatever I can do to help, I'm here, and.
Well, that's good.
And he's an excellent addition to the board.
Well, you know what? It's good because that's the way they would use me, as a nonprofit, as a lawyer, and and it's the work that we do for the community. So I'm glad. Much needed here. Yeah. Thank you, folks, for your invite. I hope I didn't bore you. I hope it was good information that you got. We're around. Anything you need. So
I do want to mention, because obviously we set this up mainly in communication with Fernando and Terry, but for the whole board to know that I called Juan and on a weekend to ask him to put this together, and he was very willing to do this for our organization.
Yes.
Spoke to him about our financial constraints, and he came through to meeting our budget, and we won't find a lot of people like that. So Juan, we thank you very, very much.
No.
Yeah. For doing this for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
The beginning of hopefully long-term relationship of life with your son.
Whatever we can do, okay? All right.
And honestly, also with all the experience that you've had with nonprofits, and not only Laredo, if you see, because sometimes you can be very objective.
Yeah.
Coming in and say, hey, you guys are kind of ignoring this, or you should be able to this, or you can do this to increase participation and/or funding. We're all ears.
Okay.
Always open, so we'd welcome any suggestions they might have.
Sure.
Juan is a friend of mine, and I've known his family and everything. But when Fernando reached out to me and said, hey, we need to bring someone that knows their stuff, obviously the first person I thought of was Juan, and that is why he's here. And I hope that you all saw with his presentation that we chose.
Well, sometimes I go a little fast, but Terry knows. I try to cover as much of this information. Thank you all. Thank you. Thanks.
That's all we got to report.